I'm Dexter, and this is sort of my experience on trying to implement a back button in Ember. It was definitely an experience. So I work on a PWA here, which, because we want to keep the patterns consistent between our native apps and, any sort of web apps that we have, we often have to copy native patterns a lot. And this is sort of my journey through creating this back button. So, what I really want is for somebody to just stand up at the end and just be like, yeah, no, you've just forgotten this one, really key framework feature, which is really obvious, and, then I'll have wasted half an hour or however long, because I haven't timed this, of all of your guys' time. But, I feel like there should be a more elegant solution than what I've come up with, because I'm really not happy with the solution that I have. So, first thoughts, right? I mean, that's easy, right? You put a back action, you do this .transition to, you do the previous route, and that's all fine. But the thing that I ran into was sort of when I had many routes mapping to a single one. And the reason that this became an issue is, I guess, because the router is not necessarily a direct map to the sort of navigation stack that you want to build here. So for instance, in this example, we've got a venues route and an acts route, which both link to an information route, which is sort of one of their siblings, and there's no way to sort of go to know when you're on that information route which one to go back to correctly. So basically what we want is this on the right. This is a version. I'm not happy with the loading states, but just pretend those aren't there. Where we can basically build this kind of navigation stack. We can build it up and sort of unwind it as you'd expect. And then, for sort of more wordy requirements, we basically want a native-like navigation stack that supports this many-to-one case, can function to an infinite depth, consistency with the browser's back button, and is testable, because we have to have tests. So implementation 1, 1 in inverted commas, because it's actually about implementation 6, but it's the first I'm actually willing to show you. And this is transitions. So the transitions is passed to the will transition action thing, I guess, on in Ember, and is sort of defines this. So it's like, oh yeah, there must be a way to sort of just go back with the transition. There is not. So this has been open for 4.5 years. Still not, no activity. There's occasionally people asking me, there's occasionally a few comments going, oh, is this solved? And it's not. So this is actually not in Ember itself. This is in router.js, which is sort of tilde.io's repository. So that was not gonna fly. I tried, using transitions, storing them, but it died for one reason or another. So come to implementation number 2. Which is using window.history.back. Now the key thing here is to keep this consistent, right? We have to find have the native back button consistent with whatever our back button is doing. We're a mobile application running in browser. You have no guarantee that they're only going to use your back button or they're only going to use the native back button. So you have to sort of find some way of being consistent between these two things. So I came up with this naive implementation, which runs us into the first of many problems, which is this, that the user can leave this app. Sorry. So here we're sort of navigating directly to a URL somewhere potentially midway between our in our navigation. We press back and we end up back in Google, which is really not ideal. So we need some way of sort of preventing the user leaving this app. And the way that I came up with this was basically to just try and create my own sort of array, which has all of these, different navigation frames pushed into it, and then, we can wind and unwind. So basically all we're doing is we're just, then when we go to our back button, we can just say, oh yeah, have we got any transitions? Have we transitioned at least once? So can we go back? And otherwise just default them back to the application route. So even though it's not a great user experience, they're not leaving the app. So I'd like to talk about replace with versus transition to. Sorry, I just realized this is a really rooty talk for NWTP. But yeah, so replace with versus transition to. So transition to and replace with are the two ways you can move to a new route in Ember. If you use replace with, the new route is not pushed into the sort of history stack, and if you do transition to, it is. So the key thing is, right, that basically, yeah, sometimes you don't want something to be pushed into it. So here we're browsing to a market, and then sort of we have many contracts on a market. Essentially speaking, what you're looking at here is changing the query parameters on this and reloading the model. But fundamentally, as a user, once I've flicked through all of these, I want to just go back, right? Back to me is this screen. It's not the 6 different contract things. So that's an example of when you would use replace with. So, and our history stack really does need to support this. We need to, if we're ever going to have any hope of, keeping our back buttons consistent. So there's a URL method, which is on transition. So, we can just basically go, if transition.url method is not equal to replace, which is what it is if you use replace with, then we can use this. But that doesn't work because this is the offending line of code in actual Ember itself. Line 95 is what you want to look at. You can see that the way in which we set our URL method is with this dot method sort of final function. And it's actually transition to that calls will transition. So basically, by the time we reach that will transition hook, we have no idea whether we're replacing, whether we're transitioning to, whether we're doing anything like that. So, I mean, I hacked around it. This is the first of many hacks, which I'm not happy with. Basically, just wait till the run loop hits the router transitions queue. And then, we actually have that information set so we can test it. I'm really worried that there's some minor race condition here that I haven't sorted out, but I guess I'll find out when that happens. So basically, we have a back button. It doesn't leave the app, and it supports replace with. One's not on Ember, this one's on me, but we've just basically programmed a memory leak as a feature, which this transition stack is going to just get giant. It's particularly pertinent for PWA because you're expecting this to be saved onto the user's home screen. You're expecting this to be a long-lived application. Memory leaks are really, they're dangerous. So basically, just added a buffer. So basically, with that replacement, we have an implementation that works, which is fantastic until we run into another problem, which is completely untestable. Because we run our tests, the first thing that hits the tests, I'm back to Ember again, and I have, so we need a way of sort of stubbing this out, right? Because that makes perfect sense that we'd expect that behavior. So I was stumped here. I was ready to give up. We have a technical specialist here called Andre. He's a legend. And he went digging through Ember and came up with the following solution, which I then later implemented. Basically, Ember has a location sort of provider. There are 2 of these that are predominantly used. The first one is history, which is going to interact with the HTML5 history API and do as you'd expect. And the second one is none. This is the one that is registered in testing and behaves how you'd expect it to behave. So basically what we'd like to do is we'd like to take the location none. We'd like to basically stub out window.history.back to use this location none service. And then the user won't leave the page. It makes all of our sort of transitions that we're going to have testable. And basically it works. Which would be nice if, sorry, this is like the code. I forgot I had that slide. My bad. So which would be nice if we could just do this. But this is the literal APIs that the 2 different things expose. If you look into Ember, just the URL methods. But we can see here that there's, for some reason, 0 replace with support on the location none. It just didn't have that hook. In fact, there was, up until recently, there was literally just a bit of defensive code, which was if replace URL, then call it, otherwise just pass onwards. So at this point, I was pretty mad. I'm not going to lie. This is sort of the abridged version. So this was about a week of my life to get here, and I was like, fine, I'll make my own location with replace state support. And so I did. But basically just by monkey patching onto location none. All we're going to do here is we're going to just nick the original sort of replace set URL function, because that's, at the end of the day, all that matters is we want that to be called at some point. We're going to define a replace URL function, which just basically pops and a set URL function, which basically just pops or onto our URLs and removed from our stack. So it's exactly the same as the implementation we have on our route. And then, when we call back, we can just basically check if we have a previous URL and then return to that previous URL. Then on each test, we just call before each, we just monkey patch that, and then afterwards we restore. Woo! So we have an implementation that's testable, which I was so happy with, and I was there and I was completing the work because this, our architects, senior developers, technical specialists, everyone had gotten involved, and we finally fixed this. We'd finally got to the back button, this testable, supports replace with and doesn't leak memory. But about 3 hours later, I was sitting there playing on my phone, and I was on Chrome on iOS, which is a use case. Our usage statistics show about 50-50 between Safari and Chrome for our personal users. And it just doesn't work because for some reason, Apple in their infinite wisdom have overridden the history.pushState function with custom code. So there's just no way of making it work. So in all Ember apps at the moment, if you're accessed on iOS on Chrome on iOS, just replace with isn't functioning in any way, which was really annoying after doing this for so long. And so I came up with the elegant solution of giving up, which was basically all I could come up with. I wanted to continue fixing it, but by this point, we had so many dev hours, dev days, etc. into it that we hadn't got round to it. It's something I want to do. It's something I intend to do at some point, but just haven't had the time, basically, in so far. But it's going to be okay, right? Because I've chucked this into an add-on for you. So if you want to implement sort of mobile navigation stacks, you just need to install this, and hopefully it'll all work. But there is one last problem that I wanted to solve, right? And that's because this sucks. And I mean it really does, because this is just basic acceptance test code, and this is what you're going to need to run to use my add-on. You're going to need to have stub history back and then call it on any test that's eventually going to call that action, right? And the reason that this sucks so badly is because when you're not now, but 2 years down the line, what's going to happen is eventually you're going to forget to put that function in. You're going to you're not going to pass it, and then you're going to be logging onto your test, and then just one test in the middle of 1,000 is going to go, oh, back, and you go, why? Which one is it? And it's hard to find out which one it is. It's hard to figure out what's going on. You're going to notice that it doesn't happen in all your other tests, and for some reason this function's just not getting hit. It's just one of those bugs that's going to take you forever, and you're going to get nowhere with it. So I came up with the idea of let's create our own setup test helper, right? So this is exposed from whatever your sort of testing thing is. We use QUnit. So basically create your own setup application test that calls setup application test, and then anything else. So if you've got a session that you need stubbing out or Mirage, etc. And then basically override the acceptance test blueprint to immediately use this. So basically the only line here that's changed, this is full copied from Ember, is the setup application test, and it's just this path here. So now we're going to our own helper and calling setup application test. And that means that every time that an Ember developer who is an Ember developer, he's going to come in and go Ember G acceptance test, functionality test, whatever that functionality might be. Which, and I like this because it reduces mental overhead, because, it's one of those things I hate coming into a project and being told, you just have to remember to, add this, and you have to remember to do that, because it takes you a lot longer to get productive. And I actually did this, and we had a junior dev sort of join our team recently, and he had no idea that the acceptance test blueprint had even changed, which I think is just, the perfect amount of the perfect thing for the solution. If you don't know Ember blueprints and overriding them and messing about with that, there's a acceptance test blueprint repo that I've just chucked up there, which is this exact pattern if anybody wants to copy it, because I found it to be quite powerful. Right, so I guess what's the takeaway from this, if there is one, is that I really feel like this is something that Ember should be fixing if it is possible. Messing with this history API I feel should be the prerogative of Router, JS, or potentially Ember itself. So ideally, we'd like to fix that. But until then, just use the add-on, I guess, and save yourself a lot of headaches, because it took me and my team, this is not just me, this is my entire team, a very long time to do that. There's an asterisk there because while I was preparing this talk, I've noticed that Ember 3.6 beta has moved around some stuff in the router. Like JS files, there's been a bit of refactoring there. I've tested it on beta 3 and it works, but if there's any more, it might change. I'll keep you posted, but I'm sure I'll find, if there is anything, I'll find a way around it. But yeah, thanks for listening. This was my first ever talk at anything like this. I had a week to prepare, so you know, hopefully it wasn't too atrocious. And I'd actually love to know how everyone's sort of testing their navigation, because you know, as near as I can tell, it's hard. Thank you.